Thank you, Terry. I just wanted to welcome you all to Logan. I hope that while you're here, you're able to take advantage of our tremendous fall weather that we're having. It's been an unusual, delightful fall. We also should give thanks that we're not on the East Coast this morning, where I was looking at the news, and looks pretty dreadful back there for a couple of days. If you were here a month or so ago, you would have been able to take advantage of some of the tremendous colors from the big-tooth maple turning, and if you get up into the high country, you can still get an opportunity to look at some of the aspen colors and that sort of thing. Well, what you're here today for is to begin this conference. It's a conference where you'll get to see a variety of talks on balancing opportunities associated with energy development with the concerns of protecting the health of our ecosystems. I never thought I'd be standing here talking to a group of people in 2012 and discussing how, in terms of our carbon emissions, our greenhouse gas emissions, we have just about reached the reduction limits that were proposed in 1997 in the Kyoto protocols. That's an amazing change that's happened in the last couple of years, and in some ways it makes this focus of our conference even more relevant. Our task and part of the goals of this conference are to assess how we can take advantage of these new techniques in oil and gas development and learn to harvest fossil fuels while minimizing impacts on biodiversity, our air and water resources, and the sustainability of our rural economies. And so this is a very tall order, and I wish you well with this task and hope that you have a very productive meeting. If you do get some time, I hope that you're able to take advantage of our beautiful campus. I don't know about plant people, which I know some of you are, but as a birder, I always keep a life list. And so I don't know if you have life lists of trees. But I wanted to point out that we have a number of unusual trees on campus, a bald cypress that's just in the lawn out here that's turning a lovely rust color now. And we also have a monkey puzzle tree, pistachios, a giant sequoia, Turkish hazel, and a variety of other things. If you want to know more about these tree resources, you have to talk to Mike Coons, who's here somewhere. He's our department head in the very back of the room in the Department of Wildland Resources. He knows the secret location of all these. And so I hope that you're able to enjoy the conference, our campus, and plan to also think about joining us next year when the focus on the Restoring the West Conference will be managing forest for resilience. And so welcome to Logan, and I hope you have a good time.
Again, my name is Terry Messer. I'm a professor, an extension wildlife specialist at Utah State. And what I wanted to do is draw your attention to your program this morning. And on the back, we've got listed all the conference sponsors. In addition to the S.J. and Jesse Quinney College of Natural Resources, the Utah State University Extension, the Department of Wildland Resources, the Aspen Alliance, U.S. Forest Service, Ecology Center, Juniper Systems, and Dry Water Time Release are actually sponsors. Then in the inside of your program also, you'll find the list of the conference organizers. A lot of work goes into putting these conferences together. Darren McAvoy and Mike Coons have been stalwarts in putting this together, and I mean, we're actually into several decades now of putting this conference together. And so take a few minutes, look at the program, and and again acknowledge the sponsors for the support for putting this conference together. It's my job, in addition to moderating the first session, I'm going to provide some opening comments. And in doing comments, I was thinking about something unique and something to say about this conference, which might be appropriate universally. In addition to my role as being a university professor, I've been have the honor and privilege to be part of the U.S. military in some way, shape, or form for over 30-some years. Most recently, I'm a commander of a U.S. Army Reserve Combat Stress Unit. They focus on maintaining the behavioral health of U.S. combat forces. In the unit that I am right now, I have a number of mental health providers, including psychiatrists, psychologists, psychiatric nurses, chaplains, and all of them have a tremendous amount of experience both in the civilian and the military side dealing with behavioral health issues. Many of them, because of their specialty and demands, they've been deployed multiple times. Now, I'm not a mental health provider, but I've had a lot of experiences being a commander of different units, and in some of the units that I've been involved in, I've had soldiers actually attempt suicide, unsuccessfully. But because of the mental health system and the behavioral health expertise of these individuals, a lot of them are on the path right now to rebuilding their lives, and that's really a good thing. And so I have the greatest respect for the mental health providers that I've worked with, and I applaud their passion for taking care of soldiers. Recently, I had a social worker, return from a deployment from Afghanistan, and as part of this return, I spent some time debriefing the soldier, discussing some of the experiences, and kind of put those things into my toolkit for possible future deployments. One of the things I asked the social worker about is what was his perception about the sharp increase in the mental health issues in the military, particularly suicide rates. And basically, one of the things he stated, that based on his multiple deployments, and this is an individual that's been deployed 10 years ago, and he's had multiple times since then, he basically said that there's a growing perception on the part of U.S. military forces that, in effect, there are no civilians. There are no true civilians. When we look at the definition of what typically a civilian is, and this comes from several different sources, including Geneva conferences. But basically, he said that what's happening is that the contemporary rules of engagement, they still err on the side of the caution. In other words, that you have to make sure that everyone is civilian unless there's certain actions that are taken that suggest they're not civilians. And so what that's happening has created this uneasy tension, this uneasy thing. He said, because the military forces have long labored in environments where the enemy is not really recognizable, what could be a friendly during the day could actually become a foe at night. And so his sense was that the repeated exposure to these kind of events on the part of the individual soldier in these environments gave rise to this question that the only certainty is really uncertainty. The only certainty is really uncertainty. And so, those are interesting things when we think about, the issues we're going to talk about today. And he said basically that to solve this dilemma, in the military, it's going to take more than just ending the war in Afghanistan. It's going to take more than just a stroke of the pen. It's going to take the collective wisdom of people to work together to identify, to recognize what are the underlying causes, and to work together as part of the process in healing this. And the thing he pointed out is that everyone must be engaged in that effort. Everyone must be engaged. And so when you think about there are no civilians in that context, I guess you can also tie that to what we're talking about in terms of natural resources and energy development. So as I thought about the commons, and for the last 18 or so years working in the universe of sage-grouse, in the theme of symposium, I suggest that this theme about there are no civilians also has virtue when we're looking at trying to seek resolution of some of these difficult issues. And so in my abstract, I pose this particular question. If we've got species conservation being important, and it is important. The surveys we've done, internationally and nationally suggest that people like knowing that wildlife exists in a natural state. At the same time, they also want cheap energy. And so we've got this nexus, or this, if you will, this oxymoron about biodiversity and energy development. Can they really coexist? And that really is the theme and the context of the presentations that we'll hear about today. To mitigate the risk of biodiversity and energy development becoming oxymoronic, I've come up with some basic tenets, some ideas or some phrases that I think maybe provide a baseline of some of the dialogue that we need to be thinking about when we're talking about biodiversity and energy development. And so I'm going to throw these out. Some of these are really obvious. You'll say, oh yeah, okay, that's pretty obvious. That's nothing new. And some may be a little bit more subtle, but I'm going to throw those out for your review right now, and we'll talk a little bit about these. First and foremost, energy is necessary. Everybody needs energy for daily survival. However, the future development and economic growth will depend on the long-term availability of increasing quantity of sources of energy that are safe, dependable, and environmentally sound. Right now, the energy uses that we have, the current sources and the mix of sources we have right now will likely not be able to meet the future demands and future needs for energy in this country and globally. The third point I have here is that when we look at species extinction and lost biodiversity, right now, in this context, they should not be seen as acceptable options for cheap energy. You know, the falsehood that there is such a thing as cheap energy is probably long time gone. Our current energy sources, which we have, are oil, gas, coal, nuclear, wood, solar, wind, and water. They're really useless when you think about it unless they're converted to some type of energy service. Heat, lights, electricity. In this conversion, often a lot of this primary energy that we use is often wasted because of inefficient conversion. When we look at energy development, energy use, energy efficiency should be first and foremost as part of our national energy policies for sustainable development. Increased energy conservation and efficiency must be linked to increased energy development. The next point is the choices we make regarding an energy strategy also mean choices regarding an environmental strategy that protects species, protects biodiversity. They should be linked. They're not different. They should be part of the same process and policy. When we look at energy development, there are a lot of risks associated with it, a lot of impacts. Dr. Lukey talked this morning briefly about climate change. With current energy use and future energy uses, we're going to continue to have questions and problems associated with climate change and air pollution. There's costs associated with that. There's health costs. There's restoration costs associated with it. The energy pricing policies that we have that are important right now for stimulating energy efficiency also need to reflect these real costs, the real costs that are part of the environment. As we look to the future, low energy paths, in other words, reducing the amount of energy we use in terms of primary energy supply, does not mean that we're going to have a shortage of energy services. In other words, we're still going to need the energy for lights, for power, for all those things that are important. The challenge of sustaining the same level of energy services we have now must, however, be coupled with a reduction of that primary supply. And Mr. Stewart's going to talk just a little bit here afterwards, talking about the governor's energy plan and things along that line. In that plan, the governor does make strong reference of energy conservation. It's not just a matter of energy and jobs. Energy development does result in jobs. But there's also the second part of that equation is looking at measures to increase and enhance energy conservation. And so Mr. Stewart will shed some light on that discussion also. And lastly, when we're talking about biodiversity and energy conservation, is that we really have to think beyond the scopes of this room, the state, this country, and we have to look really at a global society. Again, Dr. Lukey talked about the United States meeting the emissions requirements and in the protocol, but other countries right now that are on the cusp of development and expanding their demand and supply and the needs for energy are also part of this particular equation. And so if we're truly looking at a resolution, what we need to also think about is some structural changes in the current institutions, the current arrangements we have institutionally, the socio-economic relationships that focus on a bigger picture involving global economy. You know, I've heard this discussion as part of the debates, and I'm sure you've all, you know, sat in and looked at different parts of the presidential debates. You know, this country, given the energy production going on in the next decade, is probably going to be an energy exporter. You know, and actually we are exporting, you know, some of our resources for national or for international use. And so the solution is one where it's going to involve everyone. It's going to involve all of us. And so in essence, when we look at biodiversity and energy development, there really are no civilians. So.